The first sound is a cough, not a gentle one, a wet, scraping cough that drags through the silence before sunrise. Then the creak of timber. A door, swollen with rain, groans open to a world the color of rusted iron. The village wakes slowly, like a wounded animal. Mist curls through the thatched roofs, carrying the smell of smoke, dung, and the sweet rot of last year's straw. Somewhere, a rooster screams as if it regrets surviving the night. A barefoot woman steps into the lane. Frost bites the mud beneath her feet. Her breath clouds the air as she lifts a wooden pail from a half-frozen puddle. The water gleams gray, layered with a thin film of ash. She breaks it with her hand. Steam rises. Her fingers turn red. She does not flinch. There is work to do. Inside the huts, life begins without choice. A man ties a rope around his waist because he has no belt left to use. His hands are cracked, dark with soil that never washes off. He reaches for a hoe, the same one his father held, the same one that will break before he dies. The wood feels like bone. The blade dulls against his thumb. The day hasn't even started and already it tastes of exhaustion. In the corner, two children sleep under a patchwork of rags. Their heads are close, their faces hollow. One dreams of bread, the other dreams of warmth. Neither dream will come true. The wind drags itself through the alleys and slaps at the shutterless windows. A few sparks rise from dying fires, orange ghosts vanishing in the cold. The smoke hangs low, thick enough to sting eyes before prayer. No one complains. Complaints are wasted breath in a place where breath is already taxed. Beyond the huts, the fields wait. The earth is hard as stone, frozen in ridges. Plows stand ready, skeletal, their metal blades rimed with frost. The men who walk toward them do so in silence. Conversation is a luxury they cannot afford before labor. Each step is a small surrender. The church bell tolls once, flat, reluctant, half frozen itself. That sound means more than God. It means duty. It means rent, tithes, and punishment dressed as mercy. It means you have lived long enough to serve again. The reeve appears, wrapped in a wool cloak that cost him 3 men's harvests. He carries a tally stick carved with names and debts. Behind him, the steward rides his horse slow, so everyone has time to see the mud avoid his boots. When the steward smiles, it is never at anyone. A pig escapes from its pen. It squeals through the lane, its hooves splashing mud on everything holy. Children laugh, their joy brief and dangerous. The beetle silences them with one look. He mutters a fine under his breath before the pig has even been caught. Inside one hut, a woman sits beside a cradle. The child inside does not move. She rocks it anyway. The motion is prayer, habit, denial, maybe all three. The sound it makes is quieter than breathing. She keeps rocking until her arms forget why they began. A pot of pottage waits on the hearth, thin as yesterday's charity. Cabbage, barley, maybe a shred of salted pork if luck was generous. She stirs it slow, pretending not to notice the ash that falls from the rafters into the pot. The smell fills the room, smoke, salt, and surrender. Outside, a line of men gathers near the green. Their tools rest on shoulders like a row of silent crosses. The sky lightens, a pale bruise stretching over the horizon. For a moment, it seems like the sun might offer warmth. It doesn't. It offers exposure, the cruel reminder of how much work remains. The first strike of iron against soil is like a heartbeat, then another, then 100. A rhythm of survival that no one dares interrupt. The steward rides past, his cloak brushing against the cold wind. He glances down at the men as if they are part of the landscape, mud that moves. A few look up just to remember what it's like to look at something higher than their own ground. The steward nods once, a small gesture that means everything and nothing at once. The day has officially begun. Somewhere in the distance, a crow lands on the church cross. It tilts its head as if amused by all this effort. It will still be here tomorrow. Some of them will not. The first sound is a cough, not a gentle one, a wet, scraping cough that drags through the silence before sunrise. Then the creak of timber. A door, swollen with rain, groans open to a world the color of rusted iron. The village wakes slowly, like a wounded animal. Mist curls through the thatched roofs, carrying the smell of smoke, dung, and the sweet rot of last year's straw. Somewhere, a rooster screams as if it regrets surviving the night. A barefoot woman steps into the lane. Frost bites the mud beneath her feet. Her breath clouds the air as she lifts a wooden pail from a half-frozen puddle. The water gleams gray, layered with a thin film of ash. She breaks it with her hand. Steam rises. Her fingers turn red. She does not flinch. There is work to do. Inside the huts, life begins without choice. A man ties a rope around his waist because he has no belt left to use. His hands are cracked, dark with soil that never washes off. He reaches for a hoe, the same one his father held, the same one that will break before he dies. The wood feels like bone. The blade dulls against his thumb. The day hasn't even started and already it tastes of exhaustion. In the corner, 2 children sleep under a patchwork of rags. Their heads are close, their faces hollow. One dreams of bread, the other dreams of warmth. Neither dream will come true. The wind drags itself through the alleys and slaps at the shutterless windows. A few sparks rise from dying fires, orange ghosts vanishing in the cold. The smoke hangs low, thick enough to sting eyes before prayer. No one complains. Complaints are wasted breath in a place where breath is already taxed. Beyond the huts, the fields wait. The earth is hard as stone, frozen in ridges. Plows stand ready, skeletal, their metal blades rimed with frost. The men who walk toward them do so in silence. Conversation is a luxury they cannot afford before labor. Each step is a small surrender. The church bell tolls once, flat, reluctant, half frozen itself. That sound means more than God. It means duty. It means rent, tithes, and punishment dressed as mercy. It means you have lived long enough to serve again. The reeve appears, wrapped in a wool cloak that cost him 3 men's harvests. He carries a tally stick carved with names and debts. Behind him, the steward rides his horse slow, so everyone has time to see the mud avoid his boots. When the steward smiles, it is never at anyone. A pig escapes from its pen. It squeals through the lane, its hooves splashing mud on everything holy. Children laugh, their joy brief and dangerous. The beetle silences them with one look. He mutters a fine under his breath before the pig has even been caught. Inside one hut, a woman sits beside a cradle. The child inside does not move. She rocks it anyway. The motion is prayer, habit, denial, maybe all 3. The sound it makes is quieter than breathing. She keeps rocking until her arms forget why they began. A pot of pottage waits on the hearth, thin as yesterday's charity. Cabbage, barley, maybe a shred of salted pork if luck was generous. She stirs it slow, pretending not to notice the ash that falls from the rafters into the pot. The smell fills the room, smoke, salt, and surrender. Outside, a line of men gathers near the green. Their tools rest on shoulders like a row of silent crosses. The sky lightens, a pale bruise stretching over the horizon. For a moment, it seems like the sun might offer warmth. It doesn't. It offers exposure, the cruel reminder of how much work remains. The first strike of iron against soil is like a heartbeat, then another, then 100. A rhythm of survival that no one dares interrupt. The steward rides past, his cloak brushing against the cold wind. He glances down at the men as if they are part of the landscape, mud that moves. A few look up just to remember what it's like to look at something higher than their own ground. The steward nods once, a small gesture that means everything and nothing at once. The day has officially begun. Somewhere in the distance, a crow lands on the church cross. It tilts its head as if amused by all this effort. It will still be here tomorrow. Some of them will not. The first sound is a cough, not a gentle one, a wet, scraping cough that drags through the silence before sunrise. Then the creak of timber. A door, swollen with rain, groans open to a world the color of rusted iron. The village wakes slowly, like a wounded animal. Mist curls through the thatched roofs, carrying the smell of smoke, dung, and the sweet rot of last year's straw. Somewhere, a rooster screams as if it regrets surviving the night. A barefoot woman steps into the lane. Frost bites the mud beneath her feet. Her breath clouds the air as she lifts a wooden pail from a half-frozen puddle. The water gleams gray, layered with a thin film of ash. She breaks it with her hand. Steam rises. Her fingers turn red. She does not flinch. There is work to do. Inside the huts, life begins without choice. A man ties a rope around his waist because he has no belt left to use. His hands are cracked, dark with soil that never washes off. He reaches for a hoe, the same one his father held, the same one that will break before he dies. The wood feels like bone. The blade dulls against his thumb. The day hasn't even started and already it tastes of exhaustion. In the corner, 2 children sleep under a patchwork of rags. Their heads are close, their faces hollow. One dreams of bread, the other dreams of warmth. Neither dream will come true. The wind drags itself through the alleys and slaps at the shutterless windows. A few sparks rise from dying fires, orange ghosts vanishing in the cold. The smoke hangs low, thick enough to sting eyes before prayer. No one complains. Complaints are wasted breath in a place where breath is already taxed. Beyond the huts, the fields wait. The earth is hard as stone, frozen in ridges. Plows stand ready, skeletal, their metal blades rimed with frost. The men who walk toward them do so in silence. Conversation is a luxury they cannot afford before labor. Each step is a small surrender. The church bell tolls once, flat, reluctant, half frozen itself. That sound means more than God. It means duty. It means rent, tithes, and punishment dressed as mercy. It means you have lived long enough to serve again. The reeve appears, wrapped in a wool cloak that cost him 3 men's harvests. He carries a tally stick carved with names and debts. Behind him, the steward rides his horse slow, so everyone has time to see the mud avoid his boots. When the steward smiles, it is never at anyone. A pig escapes from its pen. It squeals through the lane, its hooves splashing mud on everything holy. Children laugh, their joy brief and dangerous. The beetle silences them with one look. He mutters a fine under his breath before the pig has even been caught. Inside one hut, a woman sits beside a cradle. The child inside does not move. She rocks it anyway. The motion is prayer, habit, denial, maybe all 3. The sound it makes is quieter than breathing. She keeps rocking until her arms forget why they began. A pot of pottage waits on the hearth, thin as yesterday's charity. Cabbage, barley, maybe a shred of salted pork if luck was generous. She stirs it slow, pretending not to notice the ash that falls from the rafters into the pot. The smell fills the room, smoke, salt, and surrender. Outside, a line of men gathers near the green. Their tools rest on shoulders like a row of silent crosses. The sky lightens, a pale bruise stretching over the horizon. For a moment, it seems like the sun might offer warmth. It doesn't. It offers exposure, the cruel reminder of how much work remains. The first strike of iron against soil is like a heartbeat, then another, then 100. A rhythm of survival that no one dares interrupt. The steward rides past, his cloak brushing against the cold wind. He glances down at the men as if they are part of the landscape, mud that moves. A few look up just to remember what it's like to look at something higher than their own ground. The steward nods once, a small gesture that means everything and nothing at once. The day has officially begun. Somewhere in the distance, a crow lands on the church cross. It tilts its head as if amused by all this effort. It will still be here tomorrow. Some of them will not. Night descends like a slow curtain, heavy with smoke and silence. The manor stands bright above the valley, its windows breathing gold. Inside, firelight dances across walls carved with saints and beasts. The hall smells of roasted meat, honeyed wine, and wet fur. Servants hurry like shadows, silent and precise, carrying platters so heavy they tremble beneath the weight. The Lord reclines near the hearth, cloak lined with fox pelts, rings glinting as he raises a goblet the size of a bowl. He laughs too loudly, his voice echoing off the timbered ceiling while musicians scrape weary bows across gut-stringed fiddles. A boar's head steams at the center of the table, its glassy eyes fixed on the men who devour its flesh. Bread soft as clouds, salt worth its weight in silver, sweet apples roasted in butter until their skins collapse. Each bite is a sermon about wealth and mercy, though no one here remembers the taste of hunger. The steward bows low, whispering the week's tallies. So many debts collected, so many fines unpaid. The Lord waves his jeweled hand dismissively, as if numbers were gnats circling his cup. "Let them work," he says. "That is what keeps them grateful." Laughter follows, low and thick, like the hum of bees. A servant girl slips while pouring ale. The cup overflows. The liquid spreads, dark as blood, across the tablecloth. She freezes, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. The steward's slap comes fast and practiced without a word. The hall quiets, just long enough for her to tremble. Then laughter resumes, louder, meaner, hungrier than before. Outside, the same sound drifts down the hill like a curse, reaching the huts where no fire burns bright enough to answer. The villagers eat in silence, hunched over bowls of thin pottage. A single onion, a scrap of barley, the ghost of flavor. A baby coughs. The mother rocks him slowly, eyes half closed. Her breath fogs the air. It smells of ash and wet wool. Somewhere, a man chews a crust too hard for his teeth, then smiles faintly, pretending the crunch is joy. In another hut, an old woman murmurs over a cracked bowl. She blesses the Lord, though she has forgotten why. Beyond the fields, wolves cry, thin, uncertain, and close. The sound unsettles the air, makes even fire seem fragile. Back in the manor, the dogs feast on scraps beneath the table. They eat better than the children below the hill. Minstrels begin a new tune, soft at first, then feverish. The Lord's guests demand noise. Silence reminds them of consequence. They toast to harvests not yet sown, to wars they will never fight, to God who always seems to side with the warm and the full. A jester tumbles near the fire, his bells whispering with each fall. His grin is fixed, his eyes hollow from too many nights of mockery. Someone shouts for a story, something bloody, something grand. He speaks of peasants who tried to rise and were buried alive. The laughter is thunder, the wine spills again. The Lord applauds, promising him another loaf of white bread. Outside, snow begins to fall, slow, deliberate, uninvited. Each flake lands softly on roofs that cannot keep it out. The villagers huddle closer, sharing breath more than warmth. Their shadows stretch like prayer marks across the floor. The church bell tolls once, hollow as a hungry belly. No one moves. It is not a summons, only a reminder. Up the hill, the feast burns brighter, as if mocking the dark that waits beyond its walls. Candles drip down to stubs, and still the laughter swells, a hymn for the blind. The servant girl stands by the door, hands raw from scrubbing, watching flames devour what she'll never taste. When the guests finally stagger to sleep, bones picked clean lie scattered across silver plates. The fire sighs low, settling into embers, its glow soft as the last breath of a dying day. And outside, beneath the same indifferent moon, the village starves quietly, grateful at least for the silence. The bell rings before dawn, its voice deep and cracked with age. Mist curls through the valley, wrapping the huts like a shroud. The villagers rise from straw beds, still warm with shared breath, their limbs heavy, their souls already bowed toward forgiveness. The church stands apart, stone, cold, eternal, a single promise carved into gray silence. No one dares approach it empty-handed. Every step toward the altar must cost something. The priest waits within, wrapped in wool and incense smoke. He smells of candle wax, old books, and unspoken power. His voice, when it comes, is soft, but it carries the weight of damnation with every syllable. He tells them the world is suffering because they were born wrong. That hunger is holy. That pain is proof of devotion. The congregation kneels, bones creaking like frozen branches. They whisper prayers, half memory, half plea for warmth. The light through the stained glass paints them in borrowed grace. Red for blood, blue for heaven, gold for what they'll never touch. Children stare up at painted saints who look nothing like them, their faces pale, untouched by mud or fear. The priest raises a chalice, silver heavy filled with wine. The same hands that bless it have never held a plow. He speaks of sin, theft, lust, envy, and defiance. But not hunger, not debt, not the Lord's greed. The villagers listen, heads bowed lower, learning once more that obedience is the only path to peace. Coins clink into the tithe box, dull, hesitant, reluctant. Some give bread instead, some give tears. One woman offers her last egg, still warm from a hen she'll never eat again. The priest nods solemnly, as if receiving the soul itself in his hand. He prays for their deliverance, while his stomach growls from fasting by choice. Outside, the sky grows lighter, but the village remains dim, wrapped in its quiet guilt. The children scatter to play among the gravestones, their laughter muffled by the fog of the dead. The priest watches from the doorway, his eyes calculating how many souls might need saving this winter. He knows confession season brings more coins, more secrets, more stories traded for false peace. Inside the chapel, candles gutter in iron holders. The smell of wax and ash clings to every corner. A crucifix looms above, Christ forever caught between agony and forgiveness. The villagers leave one by one, their footsteps soft against the frost-bitten earth. Some cross themselves twice, afraid once isn't enough. Others just bow their heads, too tired for faith. At the end, only the old widow stays behind. She kneels, whispering names the priest no longer remembers. Her husband, her son, her infant daughter, all buried in the same patch of consecrated soil. Her voice trembles but never breaks. Sorrow has long since become her form of prayer. The priest approaches her slowly, offering words she can no longer hear. He blesses her anyway, not out of compassion but habit. Her tears glisten like oil in the candlelight. Outside, the bells toll again, shorter now, more demanding. The call is not for salvation, but obedience. By noon, the priest sits at his table, writing letters the villagers will never read. He records sins, debts, births, and deaths, neatly balanced like columns of a divine ledger. Each entry feels heavier than the last. He dips the quill again, watching ink bloom like rot. He wonders briefly if anyone ever hears his prayers. Then he closes the book and locks it tight. Far below the hill, the villagers return to their fields. The mud receives them without judgment or mercy. The wind carries the faint echo of hymns, thin as thread, fraying as it crosses the valley. Somewhere a mother hums the same tune softly, but her words are changed, turned into lullaby, not confession. And for a moment, as snow begins to fall again, it almost sounds like hope. But the bell tolls once more, and the illusion breaks like ice underfoot. The church remains, gray and patient, a monument to guilt built with trembling hands. And in its shadow, the village bends lower still, believing that to suffer quietly is the holiest act of all. It began with whispers, not screams, soft, uncertain, like gossip in the wind. No one saw the moment the sickness crossed the field. A sparrow dead on the path, a dog refusing its food. The air itself grew heavier, sweeter, wrong somehow. By dusk, the first coughs echoed across the huts. By dawn, the smell of sickness clung to every door. The midwife was the first to notice. The way eyes clouded too fast. She prayed under her breath, her fingers trembling over the child's brow. The fever burned without mercy, and when it passed, it took the name with it. Families sealed their huts with mud and fear. They whispered through cracks, trading herbs like secrets. Smoke drifted from fires meant to cleanse the air, but even the flames seemed afraid to breathe too deeply. The priest called it punishment. The Lord called it fate. The peasants called it the end. Carts creaked through the village carrying the silent and the still. No one cried. Crying wasted breath. Flies gathered in doorways, feasting like nobles at a banquet. The air buzzed with them, a low, sick chorus of decay. The bell tolled every morning now, its voice hollow, exhausted, breaking under repetition. Children watched it swing, fascinated by how one sound could mean so many deaths. The churchyard filled fast, the graves stacked close enough to touch. Shovels hit frozen ground with dull rhythm, the only work left that still paid in bread. The gravedigger stopped counting after 40. His hands blistered, his prayers stopped meaning anything. He swore he heard whispers under the soil one night. By morning, he was gone too. Inside the huts, families huddled together in silence. A mother pressed her child to her chest, feeling the warmth fade. She closed his eyes, then lay down beside him, too tired to rise again. The Lord's men sealed the doors of the dead with wax and rope. They left chalk marks like curses on the lintels. "Keep inside," they said, as if walls could stop the air. Even the priest stopped visiting the sick. His blessings now carried through doors, not over bodies. He held a cloth to his mouth as he prayed, as though salvation might be contagious too. In the manor, fear wore perfume instead of rags. The Lord's family dined alone, their plates smaller, their laughter gone. Servants slept in stables now, closer to the horses than to their masters. The cook burned vinegar in the halls and poured wine on every surface. Still one morning, a maid collapsed by the stairs. Her blood stained the floor before she could be carried away. No one spoke of her again. In the fields, crops rotted standing tall. Birds picked at them like thieves. The wheel of life turned slower, then stopped. Even time seemed to cough before moving on. By midsummer, half the huts stood empty. Grass grew through their thresholds, unbothered by ghosts. The air smelled of damp linen, smoke, and old prayers. A world reduced to silence and waiting. But death, once it had feasted, grew tired too. The coughing softened. The carts slowed. One morning, a thin light broke through the fog. The survivors stepped out, blinking at the unfamiliar sun. Their faces were pale, eyes sunken like forgotten wells. They looked around as if seeing ruins of a dream. The priest rang the bell once more, this time for thanks, not warning. He spoke of deliverance, of mercy, of divine will. But his voice trembled with something closer to guilt. The Lord reopened his hall with great ceremony, though half the servants never returned. The villagers came to kneel again, their clothes torn, their hope thin but alive. They prayed not for heaven, but for one more day without coughing. At night the wind carried faint echoes, names lost, promises broken, blessings unkept. The dead had left their mark in the stillness. Even the stars seemed dimmer now. The plague had passed, but it left behind a new kind of silence, not absence, but memory. And in that silence, the village learned to live again, slowly, cautiously, as if the air still listened. The fields lay quiet, their furrows filled with weeds and forgotten bones. The wind carried no laughter now, only the hollow sigh of absence. The village, once crowded with noise and barter, now breathed like a wounded thing. Doors swung open in the breeze, revealing rooms no one had lived to clean. Ash coated the hearths, gray and cold as old prayers. In some huts, spoons still lay beside untouched bowls, the meals of those who never came back. The air smelled faintly of lime and smoke, the ghost of fire used to cleanse what couldn't be saved. A few faces remained, thin and ghostly in the morning light. They walked like sleepwalkers through a dream they didn't remember entering. The bell no longer tolled, its silence was heavier than sound. The priest sat alone, his hands raw from blessing too many graves. He had stopped using names in his prayers. There were too many to count. The Lord's men had burned the burial pits outside the walls, but the earth still smoked like an unhealed wound. Children no longer played in the lanes. Their games had become whispers and drawings in the dust. One small girl wandered near the churchyard, her feet bare, her dress stitched from scraps of the dead. She traced the shape of crosses with her finger, then looked up at the sky as if expecting an answer. The birds had returned, timid and curious, perching on rooftops that once echoed with human voices. Their songs sounded out of place, too bright, too alive. Even the dogs howled differently now, as if they too mourned what they couldn't understand. The survivors gathered once a week in the square, counting themselves without speaking. Each time, there were fewer. Each time, the silence stretched longer. Work returned slowly, first the fields, then the ovens. The smell of baking bread returned, faint but miraculous. The blacksmith lit his forge again, its orange glow defiant against the memory of ash. He hammered not for profit, but rhythm, the steady beat of a man refusing to disappear. The women patched clothes from burial linens, their needles flashing like tiny prayers in the dark. At night, they lit candles and left them in windows, a quiet map for souls still wandering home. Some huts stayed dark forever. Those who had died inside were left untouched, sealed by fear and reverence. The Lord rode through one morning, his armor shining like a false promise. He looked down at his lands and saw ghosts tending his crops. The peasants bowed, but their eyes no longer held fear, only fatigue. He ordered the rebuilding of the mill, the fences, the chapel gate. But the fields did not care for his orders. The land had learned to belong to no one. The priest preached about renewal, about God's mercy after the trial. But even he stumbled over the words, unsure whether to thank or accuse the heavens. He stood at his pulpit, looking out at hollow faces that had outlived their faith. God spared you, he said. But no one met his eyes. At dusk, the village gathered for the first communal meal in months. A long table was set under the withered oak. They ate in near silence, hands trembling as they passed bread from one to another. When someone laughed, it startled the birds into flight. The sound of joy felt foreign, dangerous, almost forbidden. The old widow who had lost everyone sat at the edge. She ate slowly, as if every bite was a borrowed breath. When she raised her head, her eyes glimmered with something strange. Not hope, not sorrow, but endurance. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of soil and rain. Someone whispered, "It's over," but no one believed it. The next morning, mist rolled through the valley again. The huts looked peaceful, as if asleep. Yet the villagers knew better. Peace was not what followed death, only quiet. They lived carefully, as if sound itself might wake the plague from its slumber. Each night, they shut their doors a little earlier. Each morning, they opened them a little slower. And though life crept back into the fields, something in the air remained hollow, the weight of all that had been buried but not forgotten. Even the sky seemed changed, paler, more distant, like a god who had turned his face away for good. And in that fragile stillness, the village learned a new kind of faith, not in heaven, but in the mere act of surviving another dawn. Winter came early that year, cruel and deliberate, as if the heavens had decided the survivors had not suffered enough. Frost bit through the thatch before the leaves had even finished falling. The ground hardened like stone, refusing the plow's teeth. Seeds rotted in their sacks, damp and useless. The fields, once full of promise, now looked like graves waiting for names. The river slowed to a sluggish crawl, its banks rimmed with brittle ice like cracked glass. Even the crows abandoned the village, their black wings fading into the gray of endless sky. Smoke curled weakly from a few remaining chimneys, the smell of thin soup and desperation thick in the air. There was no laughter now, not even among children. They had learned to stay quiet when their bellies spoke too loudly. Every sound carried too far in the cold, a cough, a creak, the scraping of a bowl. The old spoke of winters past, but none remembered one this pitiless. The Lord's granaries were sealed tight with iron locks. He claimed the stores were for soldiers, for God's work, for spring, but hunger has no patience for prayers or politics. Men began to steal at night, first scraps, then hens, then hope itself. The Lord's men caught one of them, a miller's boy, no older than 15, his face hollow from fasting. They hung him at dawn outside the church gates, a warning carved into his silence. Snow gathered on his shoulders as if to bless him, a cruel mercy in a merciless season. No one spoke his name again, but every villager remembered his empty bowl. The priest still rang the bell for morning prayers, its sound swallowed by the wind. He preached endurance, but even his words trembled from the cold. At night, candles burned low and fast. Families huddled close, their breath rising like ghosts. Mothers wrapped children in burlap and hope, whispering stories of warmer years as if words could feed them. A woman traded her wedding ring for a loaf of bread. A man sold his last ox to buy his family another week of life. Still, the hunger crept, slow, inevitable, like snow filling the cracks of a dying roof. When the moon rose, pale and watchful, you could hear the wind whisper through the empty stalls. The animals were gone, eaten, sold, or simply starved. The barn doors swung open like the mouths of empty graves. In the manor, fires roared behind heavy curtains. The Lord's table was laid with salted meats and spiced wine. He ate in silence, pretending not to hear the scratching at his gates. Servants left bowls of broth outside for pity's sake, but never enough, never often. The dogs fought over the scraps, and the people learned to wait until morning. One boy, the blacksmith's son, found his mother frozen by the hearth, her hand still reaching for the last ember. He didn't cry. He simply sat beside her until dawn. By midwinter, the village was quieter than the graveyard. Even hunger had lost its voice. The snow buried the paths, erasing the lines between the living and the dead. Those who survived did so by instinct, not faith. They ate bark, boiled leather, scraped lichen from stones. They forgot the taste of wheat. They forgot the sound of full laughter. When the priest walked the lanes with his cross, he saw faces that looked older than the statues in his church. He offered blessings, but his words froze before they reached their ears. And yet, somewhere beneath the snow, life waited. A single green sprout beneath a frozen mound, a mouse nest warm with hidden breath. The world had not given up, only paused, like a held breath before a sigh. When the thaw finally came, it came not with joy, but exhaustion. The villagers crawled from their huts like moles, blinking at the strange, wet light. The first mud smelled of rot and renewal. They touched it as if touching God himself. No one spoke of the dead. There were too many, and grief had no words left. But when the first seed was pressed into the earth again, Every hand trembled. They prayed not for heaven, but for soil that would forgive them. And as the fields swallowed the seed, the wind carried a single sound, not crying, not singing, just breathing, the sound of a village still alive. The thaw came, but it brought no mercy. Mud swallowed the roads and the rivers carried the stench of rot. The living dragged themselves from winter's grave, but the hunger had changed them, hollowed them into something else. Their eyes no longer begged, they watched. Their silence had teeth now, sharp and patient. The Lord's banners fluttered above the manor, bright against the ruin that surrounded it. He declared a day of justice to restore order to his broken lands. The bell was rung. The villagers gathered, wary, their faces carved by famine and loss. The Lord stood on his balcony, robes clean, rings gleaming like small suns. He spoke of loyalty, of duty, of divine right. He spoke of thieves, of deserters, of punishment. He said the land had survived because of him, because of his wisdom, his leadership, his God-given strength. Below him a child coughed. The sound cracked through the speech like thunder in a dry field. The crowd shifted, restless. Their hunger had turned into something heavier, quiet rage. The reeve dragged forward 3 men in chains. They were accused of stealing grain from the Lord's stores. The first bowed his head, a farmer who had buried his wife in snow. The second stared at nothing, a man who had lost all children to fever. The third looked up and smiled. The Lord asked for confession. The farmer wept. The father trembled. The smiling man said nothing. The reeve struck him once. The man laughed through blood. The Lord's face darkened. "Hang them," he said. The ropes were old but strong. The gallows stood where the maypole once danced in spring. As the crowd watched, a murmur spread, low, electric, alive. Something inside them cracked, not loud, not yet, but final. When the first body fell, the bell tolled again, but this time the sound didn't call for prayer, it called for reckoning. That night the wind shifted. Smoke began to rise, not from hearths, but from torches. Men and women crept through the lanes, faces hidden beneath soot and cloth. They didn't speak, only nodded. The sound of footsteps in mud was enough. The manor gates were closed, but hunger and fury find doors of their own. The first to die was the reeve, found with the same rope he had tied that morning. The second was the steward, dragged from his bed, his gold teeth missing by dawn. The Lord awoke to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking glass. He called for his guards, but no one answered. The village had finally learned his language. Silence. Flames climbed the manor walls like righteous vines. Tapestries curled and blackened. Portraits of ancestors blistered in the heat. The Lord fled to the chapel, his crown still on his head. He fell to his knees before the altar, hands shaking, voice cracking through the smoke. "Spare me," he whispered, "for I am your shepherd." But outside, the shepherd's flock had become wolves. They broke through the chapel doors with axes and fury. The Lord raised his cross like a weapon, but even God stayed silent. When the flames took him, his crown melted first, gold running like tears down the stone steps. By dawn, the manor was gone. Only ashes, bones, and whispers remained. The villagers stood in the ruins, their faces lit by the red dawn. They didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They simply stared at the horizon. A world without a master and no idea what came next. The priest came out from hiding at midday. He looked at the ruins and muttered, "The devil's work." But one woman turned to him, her voice steady, low, almost tender. "No, Father," she said. "It was hunger's work." The priest had no answer. He only watched as she walked back to her hut, smoke curling behind her like a shroud. The bell tower still stood, though its rope was gone. No one rang it that day. The air itself seemed to remember the sound. By nightfall, The village was quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes after confession. And in the dark, a single thought spread through every hut like breath. They were free, but freedom, like hunger, was not kind. Dawn came gray and hollow, the light crawling weakly across a world without masters. The manor was gone, only black bones left behind, its great hall now a skeleton of charred beams and melted stone. Smoke hung in the air for days, a ghost refusing to leave the ruins it made. The villagers stood among the ashes, faces blackened, eyes empty, their triumph already turning sour in the cold light. The fire had taken more than the Lord. It had swallowed what little order had remained. The reeve was gone. The guards were gone. The priest stayed silent in his broken chapel. For the first time, no one told the village what to do, and freedom, when it finally arrived, felt like a sickness. Children wandered the fields without purpose, their feet stirring soot instead of soil. The bell rope was gone, burned or stolen, so the air stayed unnaturally still. Some tried to rebuild, stacking stone on stone, hammering planks with hands still trembling from rage. Others sat staring into nothing, their minds hollow as the huts they'd lost. The blacksmith buried his hammer in the mud. He said he was done making tools for ghosts. The widow who had spoken to the priest now led the living to divide the Lord's stores. They found salt, wine, grain, and a chest of coins no one knew how to spend. For a moment, it felt like victory. For a moment, it felt like justice. But hunger has memory, and vengeance does not feed the belly for long. By the second week, the wine was gone. By the third, the grain ran low. They began to fight, not in mobs, but in whispers. Who owned what now? Who decided? The priest tried to hold counsel, but his words stumbled over fear. He spoke of sin, but no one flinched. The people had seen worse than damnation. Hell had already passed through their doorways. One night, a boy broke into the storehouse. He took a handful of flour, nothing more. They caught him in the morning, his hands white with guilt. The villagers stared at him in silence, remembering another boy, hung in another winter, for the same crime. No one spoke. No one stopped the widow when she stepped forward. She took the boy's hand, wiped the flour from his fingers, and said only, "Eat." No one argued, and that somehow was the beginning of peace. They began to share what remained, not because they were kind, but because they were tired of graves. The priest left his chapel one morning, barefoot, cloak torn, and helped mend the mill. He didn't speak of God anymore, only water and wood and wind. The fields waited patiently under a thin veil of frost. Their silence was not cruel now, only expectant. The villagers planted what seed they had left, hands raw, backs bent, hearts cautious. The blacksmith dug his hammer back from the mud. He rebuilt the plow. The widow led prayers again, not to saints or kings, but to the soil. She said, "If the earth forgives us, we live. If not, we rest beside it." No one laughed. They simply nodded, heads bowed not in worship, but in weary respect. Spring crept in quietly, as if testing whether it was safe to return. The first sprouts pushed through the ash. Tiny, trembling, defiant. Children watched them grow as if they were watching the world start over. The manor's stones were scavenged, turned into walls, ovens, and wells. No one spoke the Lord's name again. His ashes became mortar, binding the village together more firmly than his rule ever had. When the first harvest came, it was small, hard-earned, and sacred. They baked the bread in silence, passed it hand to hand, as the bell, now hung from a tree branch, rang once for the living. The sound was thin, but it was enough. The widow smiled for the first time in years. The priest crossed himself without knowing why. Night fell gentle for once. No smoke, no screams, only the quiet of breath and the rustle of leaves. And under the stars, the village slept. Not in fear, but in something new, something fragile, something almost like peace. Morning broke over fields, still smelling of soot and wet stone. The fires had cooled, yet the air carried their memory. The villagers stood at the edge of what was left, faces roughened by ash, eyes raw with something new, authority. There was no lord now, no voice from the balcony, no whip, no tax, only the land, wide and waiting, like a wounded animal deciding whether to trust again. The widow gathered them beneath the blackened oak. Her voice, calm and grainy, cut through the smoke-blurred air. We keep what we build. We share what we grow. No crown, no tithe, no master. No one cheered. They only nodded, because belief had become a quiet thing. The blacksmith stood beside her, hands scarred and steady. He spoke of the forge, of nails, of hunger and repair. "We start small," he said. "A roof, a well, a fence that keeps the wind out." It was enough. They began to move, slow, deliberate, like thawed rivers finding their course. Axes bit into fallen timbers. Stone scraped against stone, rhythm returning to ruined soil. Children carried buckets, women fetched straw, men raised beams. No orders, no overseer, just necessity turned into motion. The priest worked among them, silent, stripped of vestments. He built walls now, not sermons. When asked who would lead, the widow answered, "No one, or everyone. The fields decide." The phrase lingered like smoke, strange, dangerous, and beautiful. By midsummer, huts had new roofs, the well ran clear, a market formed, barter and bread, laughter still unsure of itself. They minted no coins. They measured wealth in harvest, in tools, in warm loaves shared at dusk. Old hierarchies crumbled quietly, like frost beneath a steady sun. When strangers came, merchants, wanderers, the lost, they found no gate, only watchful eyes. Some stayed, drawn by the stillness. Others fled, frightened by the absence of command. The widow kept records in charcoal on scraps of parchment. Births, deaths, trades. Life catalogued without titles. The priest began teaching letters to children, his faith now written in ink, not stone. At night, they sat by the communal fire, sharing stories of the plague, of the Lord, of survival. The past hung heavy, but its weight no longer crushed. It reminded. One evening, thunder rolled across the valley. Rain came hard and sudden, washing soot from rooftops, revealing pale wood beneath. The children danced barefoot in the mud. The elders watched and did not stop them. It was the first laughter that didn't sound borrowed. Later, when the stars returned, the widow looked toward the hills. She saw distant lights, other villages, other survivors. Perhaps they too had burned their masters. Perhaps not. The thought lingered, unsettling and thrilling. Freedom was a flame, bright, fragile, always hungry. She wondered how long before someone tried to claim it again. In the forge, sparks leapt like fireflies. The blacksmith shaped iron into plowshares instead of swords. He said almost to himself, "Better to break the earth than each other." The priest heard him and crossed himself, not out of fear but habit. By harvest, the fields were full again, not rich, but alive. Wheat bent under the wind like bowed heads. The air smelled of bread, sweat, and forgiveness. At dusk, the widow rang the bell. The sound carried clean across the valley. People gathered without being told. They stood beneath a sky streaked with gold and smoke. She said only, "This is ours now. If we fail, it will be because we forget." The silence that followed was not empty. It was an agreement. Fireflies drifted above the stubble. Children slept on their mothers' shoulders. The priest closed his eyes, hearing not hymns, but the heartbeat of a living world. And in that moment, the village, scarred, rebuilt, unruled, felt something older than power, older than fear. Belonging, the kind that grows not from crowns, but from hands in soil, and the will to begin again. The first sign was dust, a pale smudge crawling across the southern horizon. No wind stirred it. No plow could have raised it that high. The widow saw it first from the hill by the fields. Her breath caught, the sound small against the distance. By dusk, the bell rang. One long, low note that trembled through the valley. The villagers gathered beneath the blackened oak, shadows against the orange sky. The priest crossed himself. The blacksmith lifted his hammer, the old reflex returning like an ache. "They're coming," the widow said, and no one asked who she meant. The dust thickened as night fell. By morning, the riders had names, spoken in whispers, shaped by fear. Some called them crusaders, others mercenaries. No one knew truth, only rumor. The stranger's warning echoed like a ghost, the kind that wear steel and call it faith. By noon, the horizon moved. A line of glinting metal, banners frayed by wind. The riders came slow, deliberate, as if savoring the fear they cast ahead. Their armor caught the sun in cruel flashes, their horses black with foam and road dust. When they reached the village edge, the bell fell silent on its own. The widow stood before them, flanked by the priest and the blacksmith. The lead rider dismounted, helmet plume torn, voice sharp as frost. "In the name of the Southern Crown," he said, "this land is claimed for order and tithe." The widow did not bow. Her hands were empty, but her gaze unshaken. "There is no crown here," she said, "only soil and those who tend it." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Amusement, maybe pity, maybe something colder. The rider's gauntlet creaked as he reached for his sword. The sound alone made the children flinch. The priest stepped forward, his voice breaking like dry wood. "These are God's people," he said. "They've lost enough to your kind." The rider turned his head slowly, visor gleaming like a faceless moon. "Then they can give the rest," he said. He drew steel. The sound was not loud, but it changed the air. The blacksmith moved first, not fast, not wise, only human. His hammer struck the rider's chest, a dull clang that sang across the square. The horse reared, the crowd scattered, and chaos found its opening. Screams tore through the air, raw, desperate, real. The riders surged forward, hooves crushing mud and bone alike. The bell swung madly, ringing itself hoarse, as the sky filled with smoke and fury. The widow pulled a child from the ground, blood streaking her arm like war paint. The priest fell to his knees, shouting prayers no one could hear. The blacksmith fought until his breath turned ragged, until the hammer slipped from his trembling hands. When silence finally returned, it came not as peace, but exhaustion. The riders had left as suddenly as they came, taking what they wanted, leaving what could no longer stand. Corpses lay like shadows in the mud. The bell hung still, its tongue cracked in half. Smoke rose from huts, slow, curling, almost peaceful in the ruin. The widow stood in the center of it all, face streaked with soot and ash. Her voice, when it came, was steady, quiet, final. "They've taken our dead again," she said, "but they can't take what's left." The survivors gathered, hands trembling, eyes hollow. They began to move debris, not for rebuilding yet, just to see who still breathed beneath it. The priest's robe was torn, the cross snapped in two. He carried it still, a broken faith for a broken world. That night, no fires burned. They sat in darkness, listening to the wind carry away their smoke. The widow watched the southern horizon until dawn, where the dust had finally settled. She whispered, "He warned us. He saw this coming." And somewhere beyond the woods, A single spark flickered, a campfire, faint and far. Perhaps it was the stranger, perhaps it was the riders, perhaps both. The widow turned away. "We rebuild again," she said, though her voice cracked on the word again. And the people obeyed, not out of hope, but habit, because that's what the living do when the world refuses to end. The smoke from the southern raid still lingered, thin gray fingers twisting above the black treetops. The village lay quiet, stunned by loss, but silence never lasts where vengeance breathes. At dusk, the widow gathered a handful of men. Their faces were carved from hunger and ash. No one spoke of justice. Justice was a word for people with full bellies. They carried what they had: axes, scythes, one rusted sword. The priest followed, clutching a lantern that shook with every step. The woods swallowed them whole before the stars had risen. The air smelled of pine, sweat, and fear held tight behind teeth. Owls called once, then fell silent. Even the wind seemed to listen. They found tracks soon, deep ruts where horses had rested. Boot prints, heavy, careless, leading north along a narrow creek. The blacksmith knelt beside the trail, his hand brushing a scrap of crimson cloth caught on a thorn. "They camped near water," he whispered. The widow nodded, eyes catching the lantern's trembling glow. Hours passed, each step louder than a heartbeat. Then, a flicker ahead. Firelight, voices, the riders. Their camp was a wound in the forest, a ring of torches burning around stolen food and laughter. Armor lay piled like shed skin, wine spilled across furs, gold gleamed beside blood-stained hands. The villagers crouched in the shadows, faces lit by the faint pulse of flame. The widow spoke first, her tone colder than the night. "Take only what they took, leave the rest to fire." The priest trembled. "This is murder." She looked at him. So was theirs. The blacksmith rose, hammer in hand. He looked like a man walking back into a dream he'd once escaped. They moved as one, mud, breath, heartbeat, a single creature of grief. The first guard died before he could shout. Steel struck flesh with a wet finality. The sound carried, but the forest swallowed it whole. Chaos bloomed in red and gold. Sparks leapt like spirits freed from torment. The widow's blade found a man by the fire. He turned, eyes wide, whispering a name she didn't know. He fell into the flames. The smell of burning wool filled the air. The riders woke too late. Half drunk, half dreaming, they met death without ceremony. The blacksmith's hammer crushed a helmet into silence. The priest dropped his lantern. Oil hissed across the ground. Flame met dry pine, and the night ignited. Trees caught fast, roaring skyward. The smoke curled like serpents through branches. The widow shouted, "Back! Back!" But the wind was against them now. Fire raced along the ground, licking boots, searing cloth, devouring breath. They dragged the wounded out, coughing, half blind. The blacksmith stumbled, his beard alight. He fell to his knees in the ash, face lit like a dying forge. The widow pulled him clear, her hands blistering. He smiled once, teeth red. "Worth it." The forest screamed, a sound of bursting sap and shattering bark. Animals fled through the underbrush, shadows within shadows. When it was done, the riders' camp was nothing but ember and bone. The villagers stood among the ruins, their faces glowing orange, their eyes hollow. The priest sank to the ground, sobbing into his sleeve. "This isn't victory," he said. "It's damnation." The widow stared at the flames. "They made their hell," she murmured. "We just lit it brighter." The fire burned through the night, turning the horizon red until dawn bled over it. By morning, nothing moved but smoke. The air tasted of salt, ash, and endings. They walked home without words, each footstep crunching on frozen embers. The blacksmith's hammer hung from the widow's belt now, too heavy, too sacred to discard. Behind them, the woods smoldered for days, a warning written in fire against the pale sky. Children later said they could still hear the screams at night. The elders said it was only the trees mourning their dead. The widow never denied either. Some truths were large enough to hold both. When the last flame finally faded, the valley lay under a veil of gray. The village had avenged itself, but vengeance, like winter, always asks for one more life. And in that silence, under a sky the color of smoke, the survivors understood the cost of fire and how easily warmth turns to ruin. The fire died sometime before dawn, leaving only whispers and the faint crackle of ruin. Smoke curled low over the valley, clinging to the fields like a ghost that refused to leave. The villagers woke not to birds, but to silence so complete it pressed against their skin. Ash fell like gray snow. It dusted the roofs, the wells, the hollow eyes of the living. The widow rose first, hands blistered, dress stiff with soot and old blood. She walked through what was left of the night, barefoot, every step sinking into blackened earth. The air smelled of iron and regret. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. Behind her, others followed, slow shapes in the gray, wrapped in smoke and disbelief. The priest held the broken cross close to his chest, murmuring prayers that drifted upward unheard. The blacksmith's hammer still hung from her belt, its weight a reminder and a promise. They reached the edge of the woods, where embers glowed like dying stars among the ash. The ground there was unrecognizable, a battlefield disguised as earth. The riders lay where they fell, steel warped, faces gone. The fire had taken mercy where men would not. The widow stood among them, and for a long time no one spoke. Then, softly, "They won't return." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were distant, as if she were seeing something beyond the smoke. The priest asked, "And what are we now?" She looked at him. "Alive. That will have to be enough." They buried what could be buried. The rest they left to the forest. The soil was too heavy for grief. Every shovelful was a prayer, every mound a scar. By noon, the sun broke through, its light pale, thin, almost ashamed. Children stood in the fields again, their laughter cautious, as if afraid the world might hear and take it back. The old well still held water, though it tasted of smoke. They drank anyway. The blacksmith's forge was gone, but the anvil survived, a lump of iron glowing faintly in the ruins. The widow placed her hand on it, felt its warmth, faint but stubborn. She whispered, "We begin again." That night the villagers gathered what they could: wood, cloth, courage. They rebuilt the smallest hut first, because every beginning needs shelter, not grandeur. The priest hung the cracked cross above the doorway. It leaned crookedly, but the villagers left it that way, a reminder that even faith can break and still stand. The moon rose bloodless and bright, reflecting off the river like a blade left in the dirt. No songs were sung that night. No one spoke of the fire. But when the wind changed, it carried something new. Not hope, exactly, but endurance. The widow sat outside the rebuilt hut, eyes on the tree line, where the stranger had once vanished. She wondered if he watched from the dark, if he'd seen the flames reach for heaven and decided not to return. A part of her hoped he hadn't. A part of her hoped he had. The priest joined her, his hands shaking less now. "The fire cleansed nothing," he said. She nodded. "It wasn't meant to. It only reminded us." "Of what?" "That everything burns, even mercy." The wind sighed through the reeds, and for a moment the world felt ancient again, as if the same scene had played out 1,000 times before. Kings and peasants, soldiers and ghosts, all kneeling before the same ash. Somewhere deep in the forest, a wolf howled, low, distant, alive. The children stirred in their sleep. The widow smiled faintly, a tired expression that didn't reach her eyes. Tomorrow, there will be plowing and mending and the endless rhythm of survival. Life would return not because it was invited, but because it never truly left. The fields would green again, and no one would speak of the fire, though everyone would carry its warmth in silence. When morning came, the valley looked the same as it always had, ordinary, fragile, beautiful in its stubbornness. The widow stood at the edge of the field, sunlight cutting through the mist around her. Behind her, the new huts smoked gently from their hearths. Ahead, the world stretched vast and quiet, its soil rich with death and promise. She whispered, "Let it be enough." And the wind, soft and ancient, seemed to answer, not with words, but with peace.